From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's today's lineup. Out of Oklahoma State University, Derrell Peel with this week's commentary on the cattle markets. Derrell will break down the USDA's latest cattle on feed report, and he'll discuss the undeterred run-up in boxed beef prices. Then from the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State, remarks on a couple of timely topics for you cow-calf producers, managing to extend the grazing season and putting together a sound calf pre-weaning vaccination program. Also, we'll have a preview of a special field day to be co-hosted by K-State next week at Flickner Innovation Farm near Moundridge. Remarks from Ray Flickner there. And Jeff Wickman awaits with this week's 4-H segment. All that here on this Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Welcome to our Monday edition. And for our cattle market segment, we turn to our colleague down at Oklahoma State University for his thoughts on the trades and allied topics. Derrell Peel with us, livestock economist. Well, Derrell, we have quite a handful of things to take up today, but looking back at last week's trade, we did see the Fed cattle market apparently nudge a bit, finally, slightly to the higher side.
That's right. You know, we're very close to turning the corner. We've been waiting for this for several weeks. It always seems to take a little longer, but I really think we're just on the verge of kind of turning the corner on this fed cattle market. We seem to have it a little better in place in the northern part of the country. Southern Plains has had a little bit more cleanup work, but, you know, I really think we're just on the verge of seeing this thing finally get out from under the kind of cap it's been under for many, many weeks now.
And the catalyst there is at the tie this together, the relentless uptick in boxed beef prices.
Well, certainly we've got that, and you know, I mean, we've just continued to see strong demand. You know, frankly, the first run-up we had in boxed beef in the first half of the year was stronger than I expected, and we're doing it again, and I think it really speaks to how good beef demand is, both domestically and probably export-wise. We won't confirm that for a while yet, and so what we're really looking for now in this fed cattle market is to get to a point where we can really tie these two markets back together in a more typical way, the way they should be. And we haven't been able to do that because we've had this disconnect because of slaughter capacity constraints. But we're going to get to the point where we tie these together, and that's going to give some real support to this fed cattle market based on the stronger boxed beef market that we've got.
And to conclude the look back last week, how did feeder cattle prices fare?
You know, feeder cattle prices have been generally stronger. Of course, the heavyweight feeder cattle normally go up through the summer. We've had a nice, strong, seasonal trend that continues here through the summer. The calves, really now start to look ahead towards that fall seasonal decline. But we're really holding in there pretty well on these calf markets, and that's, one of the questions is whether we'll see much of a seasonal decline. Again, these cattle markets are all kind of poised to, sort of take off. There's a lot of optimism baked into the market right now, and it's just a matter of kind of seeing how it plays out here over the next few weeks.
As you said, the hope is that the Fed trade will be more directly aligned with boxed beef improvement. But just to ask about the boxed beef trade itself, how much longer can it sustain this kind of momentum, do you think?
Well, again, we continue to be surprised at that. I mean, we haven't really seen a lot of, sort of demand rationing at these higher prices, and that's because the protein demands in general are good. Beef is probably getting the lion's share of that benefit, but, we're seeing stronger pork and poultry prices as well, and it just really speaks to the consumer demand and the amount of income or the amount of money that consumers have right now and are interested in spending on this. And if you look at, you break that boxed beef down into the various primals, it's really across the board, although clearly rib demand is the biggest leader in that, but we're seeing stronger prices for the end meats, the chucks and the rounds, as well as the ribs and loins. And again, I think it's a very broad-based demand that's built on both domestic and international markets.
Let's toss into the fray here the latest cattle on feed report out Friday from the USDA, and nothing earth-shattering out of those numbers, it would appear, but the placements number did catch some attention.
Well, that's right. I mean, there was nothing really, majorly unexpected in this report. The August 1 cattle on feed inventory is down about 2% from a year ago. Placements in July were down about 8% from a year ago. Marketings were down about 5% from a year ago. And so, we continue to see this thing just kind of consolidate. This on-feed inventory for August 1 is the sixth month in a row of declining feedlot inventory. So we peaked in February, we've declined, and that really speaks to the fact that we've, again, kind of moved through this bulge of cattle and the backlog, if you will, of cattle, and we're really cleaning that up at this point in time. And we look for, smaller year-over-year numbers really going forward.
Let's talk a bit about the export scene and numbers that you pulled together for a recent article you posted on our beef export movement, and specifically to the trade that we've been able to maintain and improve to Canada and Mexico. Those numbers are pretty impressive, aren't they?
Well, that's right. We continue to see this North American market really, integrate, if you will, where we've got bilateral flows, and I think most everybody understands that Canada and Mexico are both major sources of imports as well as destinations for exports. And what that really speaks to is the fact that we're adding value in all of these markets because we're moving products of different types and different values, different directions, depending on where the demand is really the best. And so it really shows how these markets continue to integrate and add value across the entire, continent. And it really emphasizes that in a very real way and in a very beneficial way, we have a North American market, not really three separate national markets.
As you look broadly at the export scene, Derrell, do you see any other markets that are poised to really pick up in terms of volume trade, our sales, that is, to other countries?
Oh, I tell you, the big mover in these markets is clearly China, and really it's China, Hong Kong. We put those numbers together because they're really one market, even though we get the data separately. But that market has been the fastest growing market through 2020 and so far in 2021. That combined China Hong Kong market is our third largest export market. It's now actually bigger than Mexico, behind Japan and South Korea. But at the rate it's growing, it could easily be our major market here in the foreseeable future, not this year or maybe even next year, but going down the road, there's really no reason to expect this market to slow down. That demand is pretty fundamental growth, and I really look for it to continue.
All of this is funneling down into renewed enthusiasm amongst cattle producers, and you say that you observed that firsthand as you were attending that cattle industry conference here a week and a half back.
Well, I think so. I think the mood is generally improving in the country. There's a lot of optimism in the market. Certainly there's a lot of optimism, baked into the futures markets for both live and feeder cattle. And I think everybody sort of recognizes the fundamentals are lining up. The demand has been exceptionally strong. And that's the great thing, is that strong demand pulls everybody. So it makes it easier for us to have maybe less of the internal dynamics across sectors when we've got demand pulling everybody higher at the same time. And I think that's what we're looking for here at the end of 2021, and certainly will be our general expectation going into 2022.
All right. You had a chance last week, you say, to travel to the state of California to visit with cattle feeders in that state. And on an express topic, the beef on dairy developments in the industry. And you might explain that and talk about why that's a hot topic at the moment.
We're seeing dramatic change. Obviously, Holstein steers have come into the beef industry forever. I mean, those animals are a part of our beef supply. And, ultimately all of the females, too, enter our beef supply. But what we're seeing now, because of the technology available, the reproductive technology with sex semen and even embryo transfer, that now the dairy industry is able to really target more of those calves to be crossbred dairy beef calves. And that gives you a, substantially improved carcass type, quality. It changes the whole feedlot situation. It doesn't change overall numbers that much because we were getting those dairy calves anyway, but now we're getting them in a much more, beef-type animal, and there's lots of changes going on in the industry as far as learning how to manage and feed these cattle, take care of the health of them. They're a little bit different than either one before, but also the implications on the meat markets as we change the composition of carcass quality and so on.
When you think about that longer run impact on the meat markets, this will be more higher quality beef in the trade. Is that the basic of it?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, Holstein calves, for example, straight Holsteins grade really well. We've always gotten, or for many years, we've gotten a very high percentage of prime, for example. When you do the dairy beef crossbred, you not only get that tendency for, good grading, but now you get a more muscular animal. You get a different carcass composition that's more preferable in the market. So in general, it is going to raise the average quality of meat, the beef offerings that we have.
Lastly, any thoughts on the trade ahead this week? The door's been cracked open with very slightly higher money in the Fed market. Further improvement this week, perhaps?
I really expect to see it. Again, you never know quite how fast it will happen. And this is a tough time of year to think about fed cattle markets going up. We're about a month ahead of the normal seasonal low, but we've been lower than we, would have been without some of the problems we've had. So I think this market is poised to step up here on the fed cattle side in these next coming weeks as we work our way on into these better number conditions.
Well, Derrell, we always appreciate your views on the markets, and we'll catch up with you again quite soon. Many thanks for your time right here.
You're very welcome.
He's out of Oklahoma State University, livestock economist Derrell Peel. Among our regular contributors on the cattle markets here on Agriculture Today, and we'll return with more after this break. You're tuned in to the K-State Radio Network.
Agriculture Today, I'm Shelby Varner. A pair of items of interest to cattle producers were recently taken up on a recent Cattle Chat podcast hosted by the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University. One had to do with searching for ways to extend the grazing season for their cattle, and the other focused on putting together a plan for managing calves ahead of weaning time. Veterinarians Brad White and Barb Larson and beef cattle nutritionist Phillip Lancaster lend their insight on these topics.
If I want to extend the grazing season, what are some of my options? Are there any things I would consider? And I'm going to frame it for you. I want to think about other potential grazing sources. So maybe sorghum Sudan, maybe other cover crops, things of that nature.
When you say extend the grazing season, I mean, immediately to my mind, it jumps to like beginning and end of the grazing season. But there are also ways to improve or enhance your grazing through the summer. So like you mentioned, sorghum Sudan is a good one. A couple of others that they're all annuals. Pearl millet is one, and annual crabgrass is another that are good, and you don't have that risk of nitrate toxicity or anything like that with those like you do with sorghum Sudan, but you don't quite get the tonnage.
Now, are you talking plant those by themselves or overseeding them in an existing pasture? Do I have to prepare a seed bed, get everything ready, or how are those going to work?
Depends on your perennial forage base. So if you've got a warm season pasture or grass forage base already, then overseeding is not going to work well because the competition when you need to plant it is wrong. But if you've got a cool season forage base, those are going to start to slow down when the weather gets pretty hot, and so then you can interseed, and that competition is not as great, and so your annual can get established.
I think that's the key, is kind of planning it out based on time of year. And there's a couple of things to think about. When am I going to plant it, and when am I going to need it or use it? So as we talk right now, it's late enough in the year. If you planted something like sorghum Sudan or a warm season forage, you're not going to be able to use it for a while.
Well, that's just what I was thinking. This seems to be a particularly difficult time of year because most of my several of my cover crops, the sorghum Sudan, those kinds of things, we're still a few weeks away from really being able to use those. But you're stuck here in this August timeframe when some of those other annual crops aren't really available yet, but they will be pretty soon. And I think that's something to really consider. How can I extend the grazing season? To me personally, August is often a challenging time because it just doesn't fit very well with a lot of things. And so I don't sound particularly smart and like I've got great ideas for August, but it's like, well, hang on till September, October, and we got some things coming.
What about if we look toward the other end, and let's say I've got some cool season grasses coming that'll maybe help me through September, October. Is there anything that'll get me past, let's say, past a frost where I can keep grazing out there? I know some of my cool seasons I can stockpile things like fescue. Any other cover crops I should consider?
Your cereal grains, if they're planted in the fall, will do well, depending on what your situation is. But cereal rye is a very popular cover crop. If you have a crop operation or you have a neighbor that has a crop operation that would be willing to lease out grazing rights or something like that, if they're going to plant some cover crops, some cereal rye, then that'd be something you can graze in late fall, early winter, and even again in early spring before your pasture.
I was going to say, sometimes, depending on the year, you can get two uses out of that. You can graze it through the fall, winter, then it'll come on. It may be the first thing. Because you said, let's extend the grazing season both at the front end and the back end. And things like cereal rye, you can do that with. And I would encourage you to experiment a little bit with what works on your operation. So it may be a combination of any of those things we've talked about. I also, and I know in our area here, because I see them as I drive into work or not, and I enjoy watching, I'll call them the experimenters, the people who are trying something new, they're doing something different, they've got different crops. And certainly you see that, talk to those folks, because they may have something that they can tell you and say, hey, somebody else said this works great, doesn't work great here. Our next big thing we're coming up on is weaning. But I want to address a little bit of pre-weaning health management, and I want to think about it from the vaccine side. So as I have calves, let's say they're born in March, and I'm approaching an October, November weaning date, anything I should be thinking about now as far as vaccine or vaccine needs for these calves?
Yeah, I think the building block, the piece of information that people are building off of is vaccines work best when they are given to cattle ahead of the time when they really need that immune protection. So if I can get them well immunized a few weeks before they're at risk for the disease, then my vaccination program is most helpful. Think about it. Say, if I'm going to sell cattle pretty shortly after weaning, well, their biggest risk for respiratory disease is really during that time when they're going to be trucked, marketed, mixed with some other cattle. So if I can back up several weeks ahead of that and get a couple of doses vaccine into them prior to that, that really does improve the potential for them to not run into some health problems. And that's why you see some of these, special tag programs or things like that from a marketing standpoint. If you've got some fairly recently weaned calves that have been pre-vaccinated so that they're well immunized prior to that time, that has some value to the next layer, the next segment of the industry. Now, on the contrast is if I'm going to keep the cattle around for myself, I'm going to grow them up till after the first of the year or something like that, my risk may not be right at that time. And so maybe I can delay my first vaccination to the day of weaning and then the next one about 3 weeks after that. So it becomes very situationally dependent of when do you think your risk is really going to be? When am I going to change their diet? When am I going to expose them to other cattle? If we're going to be weaning in October, November, as we get towards the end of summer here, August and early September, now's the time to be thinking about some groups of cattle probably would really be good targets for a pre-weaning vaccination soon. And some, it's going to be a little bit later into the fall.
And I want to follow up on one of the things you said, because in the last year in the news, I bet we've heard more about vaccines.
Yeah, we've heard a little bit.
than any other year, right? And some of the conversation has been, did you have one dose or two dose? Some of the conversation has been, after you had your dose of vaccine, how long was it until you were considered protected? Yeah. And I think that same concept applies here, in that when we build immunity in cattle, we're often building it in stages. And soon after you're vaccinated, depending on what vaccine, you may start to build some pretty non-specific immunity that would help, but probably won't solve the issue. But a lot of times what you're saying, it may take 2 to 4 weeks before I've really got that immunity at a high enough level that might confer some protection. So I have to plan in advance of giving that. There are some vaccines that 1 dose is probably adequate, but there are some vaccines I've got to have that second dose. Would you?
No, I think you're exactly on target there. And that's why I'm really talking about planning and kind of looking ahead. So in general, because when we are talking about vaccinating these calves, it's primarily for the respiratory disease pathogens. IBR and BVD are 2 viruses. We also might have a blackleg vaccine, a clostridial vaccine in there, possibly some of the bacterial causes of pneumonia like Mannheimia, Pasteurella, those types of things. So that's the handful of products. And the reality is each one of those is a little bit different, but we're going to give them one injection. And so
1 injection for each one. I mean, we're not mixing all those together. One injection. Some of them are combined. Depends on the product, but you're probably going to give them all at one time.
One or two injections.
Yeah.
And so to optimize kind of the best for the group, I'd like the final dose to be 3 or 4 weeks before they really are most at risk. And then a lot of times we would like 1 more dose ahead of that. So that's 3 or 4 weeks ahead of that. So you're looking out here 6 to 8 weeks before you really, really want them well protected would be the optimum time to start thinking about that. And so again, if we're going to be weaning in October, it's time to start thinking about how we're going to set those calves up for really good success. The ideal time is to vaccinate cattle when they are not stressed. And we know that weaning, separation from their dam and changing their diet can be stressful. So one of the things we talk about is to get the best out of our vaccines is to have the calf and again, it has to be practical, but in the best position possible. So as little other stresses going on as possible. Some producers do great. That first vaccine may be at weaning, but they're using a low stress weaning. They're not changing the diet very much. And so that vaccine works pretty well. So I'll go back to this. You mentioned that most people have probably heard of COVID, and we've talked about the vaccine. But disease control is not all about the vaccine. It's also about good diet, low stress. Are you commingling with other calves? And the vaccines are one tool, and they're a good tool. But when we're talking about calf health, it's really about setting up the system so that those calves are going to do pretty well.
That was veterinarian Bob Larson, joined by veterinarian Brad White and nutritionist Phillip Lancaster from the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State on a recent Cattle Chat podcast. To hear the full Cattle Chat podcast and those of previous weeks, go to ksubci.org. We will return with more on Agriculture Today.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University for 97 years, this is the K-State Radio Network, and you're listening to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Once more, thanks for joining us. A pair of calendar items to highlight for you right here. One will take place tomorrow and the other a week from tomorrow. And both of these are oriented toward innovative cropping systems and approaches. First off, the program set for tomorrow. K-State researchers and extension specialists will be hosting a field day in Ellsworth County tomorrow to discuss and to demonstrate cover crop management options for soil health and water quality benefits in livestock operations. Now, this will take place to the north and west of Marquette near Canopolis Reservoir. It'll showcase how you producers can use cover crops to protect water quality by reducing sediment and nutrient losses. Among those on board for this program, K-State's Augustine Aubour out of the Agricultural Research Center at Hayes. He's been, as we've talked of here in the broadcast, evaluating cover crop management options in water-limited environments in both central and western Kansas. Also speaking at this event, local producers and landowners and representatives from the Ellsworth County Conservation District. And as part of this program, there will be a water infiltration demonstration there on site. That'll be well worth taking in. The program will begin at 9:30 tomorrow morning. It'll end at 2 o'clock. It is free, and lunch is provided. The location specifically just a mile south of the Canopolis Reservoir Dam on Kansas 141, a mile and a quarter east on Avenue T. Very easy to find, and look for signs directing you to the site. They're asking you to register for the meal count. Again, it's a complimentary lunch. Please do so by going to the website for the Kansas Center for Agricultural Resources and the Environment here at K-State. That is kkare.ksu.edu, kkare.ksu.edu. Again, a cover crop field day evaluating management options in water-limited environments. The theme there, 9:30 tomorrow morning near Canopolis Reservoir, northwest of Marquette. Now, there's another unique field day coming up a week from tomorrow, as mentioned, and Agriculture Today's Shelby Varner has the rundown on that, including comments from the farmer hosting the event. Shelby?
The K-State Department of Agronomy has partnered with a working crop farm in central Kansas to conduct cutting-edge crop production research. Flickner Innovation Farm is hosting a field day event on Tuesday, August 31st. The event is held on the farm, which is located near Moundridge in McPherson County. Those who attend will be able to hear about water quality and soil health work being done by local producers, industry members, and Kansas State University researchers. The Flickner Innovation Farm is a partnership with K-State agronomists and other entities to study efficient technologies and techniques Kansas producers can utilize on their operations. Here's farm owner and operator Ray Flickner.
Well, the Innovation Farm concept kind of came out of the idea that we could collaborate with industry, research folks, and identify opportunities to improve the conservation of water, soil, and all the natural resources that we have going on at the farm. And actually has increased in size. It originally started off kind of as an irrigation side, looking at different technology there. But we're getting into the cover crop, soil health, carbon sequestration, and all the other items that go along with that.
There will be a range of presentations and demonstrations at this event, and participants will have a chance to ask questions.
We're going to deal with a number of items starting off at 8 o'clock. We're going to talk a bit about subsurface drip and mobile drip as it relates to pivot installation. I have several parties coming out. We're going to talk about chemical drift and migration, particularly as it relates to the dicamba situation. And we have the interseeder that one of the co-ops has, where we've actually, in fact, interseeded into standing corn about 10 days ago, which should be sprouted by the time we have the field day, but they will have the interseeder there at the location, and we'll actually do a live demonstration going through there. In addition, we've got a drone that is we probably should be flying from Boston by that time without a pilot present. Now, there'll be a party there to address that with the group, but this is a group that's got FAA approval to do some autonomous flights with the pivot. We're going to spend some time at our neighbor's water tech farm as it relates to nozzle packages and water efficiencies. And then latter part of the actual field day, infield, will be cover crop, soil pit, looking at the soil health, carbon retention opportunities that are going on there, and then also cover crop as it relates to weed suppression.
Participants will also be served a complimentary lunch.
Lunch will be provided, be located in local church in Moundridge. And we've got the GMD manager lined up. The rural water district folks will be there. And then also we'll talk a little bit about some of the surface water processes that we're using to collect samples and look at analyze those for quality.
At the Flickner Innovation Farm, they are analyzing the relationship between soil health and water quality.
We're spending a lot of time and effort and it's really not a true research, it's more of a truth testing of what we're finding out, what we think's going on in the farm as it relates to water quality, water quantity, soil health, and all the related matters.
Directions to the farm are simple, as Flickner explains.
Well, from Moundridge, Kansas, if you go downtown, there is a blinking red light at the center of town, the only light in town. And if you head 3.5 miles straight west on the Blacktop or Arrowhead Road, you'll be right there at the field day.
To learn more about this free event and how to get registered, go to www.kscorn.com.
The idea was to look at a number of different items so that people could find out what their interest would be and would be happy to join us and love to see them on the day.
This field day is hosted by Flickner Innovation Farms in partnership with Kansas State University. It will take place near Moundridge on August 31st, starting at 8 a.m. For Agriculture Today, I'm Shelby Varner.
Thanks, Shelby, and we'll be back with more here on Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Record keeping is an important part of Kansas 4-H, and because it isn't anybody's favorite thing to do, they've made the process as easy as possible. Southwest Area 4-H Youth Development Specialist Amy Sollock says as youth go through the 4-H program, their record book continues to grow.
With any project experience throughout the year, we find immense value in the documentation and the reflection of what took place. And we've developed a record book system or kind of a record-keeping system, if you will, to help 4-Hers learn those important skills.
And I think some of those forms were just updated about a year ago or so?
Yeah. We've launched a whole new system of report forms, and we're really excited about how easy they are to use, how straightforward they are, and we think kids and families are really going to like them.
Talk a little bit about what they're doing, how these forms kind of help them, I guess, maybe put their thoughts and their actions down onto paper?
It's kind of a plan. It kind of forces them to think about what they want to learn. The very first section is goal setting. And so clear back in October, November, December, when kids start beginning the 4-H year and they've selected their 4-H projects, we ask for them to sit down and establish some goals. What do they want to accomplish? What do they want to learn? What might they experience throughout the year? And then as they go through the year, we want them to document and reflect exactly what they are accomplishing for any given project. There's about 9 sections, which sounds like a lot, but we've got a lot of subsections. So it really isn't too lengthy of a form. Places for them to document what they're learning, if they attend any type of an event, if they give a presentation. There's sections for all of it.
And this is actually their 4-H and non-4-H activities, right?
Yeah, we find value in documenting all of them. So we've got what we call a permanent record that we're encouraging kids across the state to utilize. And the permanent record is really this large, comprehensive record of all your activities, 4-H, school-related, maybe faith-based, and it grows with the child each year. So they add to it, and before you know it, it's really quite an impressive document. You know, one thing we hear from college admissions or maybe employers down the road, how valuable that set of records is when they apply for a scholarship or apply for a job. They have everything in one place.
Yeah, being able to go back and just immediately put your hands on it and refresh your memory of all of the things you have done, because those are all valuable skills.
Absolutely. I think our kids are busier than they ever have been with all of the activities available to them. I don't think it's humanly possible to remember everything super accurately, 5, 6, 10 years down the road. So the fact that they're documenting them and recording what they've experienced, and most importantly, what they've learned or what they've gained from those experiences, it's all right there. So when they sit down to create a resume or fill out a job application, everything's in one spot. It's really valuable.
And many youth are in the same project areas for a number of years, and I would assume that at some point they would just kind of start to all lump together. So it's nice to be able to remember maybe what they did in the second or third year of that project area.
Sure. We hear a lot from alumni and even from parents who, find their records years later, and it's really something to look back and see what you maybe started out learning as a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old versus, the immense knowledge and skill set that some of our high school age kids have. It's really quite incredible to reflect on the growth and the maturity and the wide-ranging skills that they've learned over the years.
You mentioned that the forms are easy to use, but the key word there is use. So how often should they be documenting some of their activities?
Well, ideally, like I said, this is done throughout the year. Now, I know just as well as anybody, I'm a 4-H mom now, so the days fly by, and sometimes you're documenting things or reflecting on them, after the fact. We would really like kids and families to document them as they experience them. But, if you're filling out your record or your report form once a month, once every couple months, just so that you don't have to try to, work off months and months of memory. I'd also say one of the really important key things is to get those goals written at the beginning of the year in Section 1 so that you're not writing your goals retroactively. A lot of times report forms and records are due end of September, around October 1st, and we certainly don't want kids to write goals for something that they've already done the year prior. Of course, nothing has to be perfect throughout the year. You can keep a pencil and paper copy. You can make notes in a cell phone. It's kind of whatever system works for you. And then, of course, when you submit the form at the end of the year, you want it to look nice and clean and neat. But make those notes throughout the year periodically in whatever fashion works for you.
So it may be just kind of notes as you go through the year, and then when you get ready to do kind of the final summation, you may go into a little bit more detail and be a little bit more specific?
Yeah. We sound like teachers when we're working with kids to do this. You need to be specific. You need to elaborate. Don't just tell us you did a speech. Tell us what the speech was about or how many people listened and how long did it last, those types of things. Don't just tell us you went to the Insect Spectacular. Tell us what you learned. What did you see? What did you experience there? Who helped you? Those are the types of details we like kids to reflect on.
I mentioned there are a number of forms, and it's broken out into the junior, intermediate, and senior, and then general and animal project report form areas?
Correct. We realize, 7, 8, 9-year-olds are not at the same skill level as, a middle school or a high school student. And so we've got forms that are appropriate not only for age and skill level, but we have some forms that are geared more towards general projects and then forms that are geared towards livestock and other animal projects. It breaks some feed expenses, vet bills, the finance section is a little more detailed on the animal form than the general form.
And if this is someone's first year, I think there's also even some videos they can watch that will kind of help walk them through the process.
There are. We've got a number of helpful resources available. There's a pretty large instructional guide that walks you through section by section. We've got several short video tutorials to help get you started. We really want this process to be easy. Record keeping isn't anybody's favorite thing to do. I think that's a safe bet. But it shouldn't be difficult and it shouldn't be painful. And, we think it's important enough that we want all kids to experience it and learn from it. And so we wanted a system that is straightforward and easy to understand.
That's Southwest Area 4-H Youth Development Specialist Amy Sollock. Again, for more information on record keeping, visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.